David.
All right, we are in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Tet Vav, Tet Zayin, 16, and we are in the middle of a discussion about what do you do when you have walls surrounding an area, which would make a good eruv, except that right, there's a general rule that you need the walls to be the majority. You can have breaches in between, as long as each breach is less than 10 amot, that's okay. It's considered like an opening. But all told, when you count up all the breaches and all the walls have to be the majority and the breaches the minority. All right, so that's agreed upon by everybody, but the question at hand is, what if it's exactly equal, exactly 50 and 50% breach and walls? So Rav Papa said that's totally fine, and Rav Huna said that it's not okay. This is not the regular Rav Huna, but this is a later Rav Huna, the Rav Huna Bered de Rav Yoshua, contemporary Rav Papa. So he said that's prohibited. If it's exactly equal, it's prohibited. Again, this is mostly theoretical. I don't know if you could ever have exactly 50-50, but if you could, right, what would that case be? It has some conceptual significance, like what's the most important part of it? The walls, right, or the breaches. So you might say that the walls here are the most important part. There's a counterpart, another law where this applies is when you do shechita, you have to cut the majority of the neck of the windpipe and the trachea. So if you cut the majority, so what happens if exactly equal, right? 50-50. Well, in that case, the main thing that you need to do is actually the cutting, right? It's the slice that is the most important. So there you might say that you need majority breach. So, and I guess that the question is, is it the wall that overpowers the breach or the breach that overpowers the wall? Okay, so we have this machloket, and we have 5 proofs. We saw in the previous daf 2 proofs for Rav Papa. One came from our very Mishnah, which said that you have to make sure that there's no breach, that the breaches are not more than the wall. So if it says in that language the breaches cannot be greater than the wall, that implies that if it's equal, then it would be okay. So that's a strong proof for Rav Papa. And we ended with Kashya on Rav Huna. So Kashya is not a total checkmate, but it's a pretty strong question. You're going to see that proof number 1 is going to end up winning the day at the end of the sugya. Proof number 2 came from a Mishnah in Sukkah that talked about if you have half good schach and half bad schach, and it's interspersed, it's exactly equal, and that also was a proof for Rav Papa. Rav Huna was able to answer it, but with difficulty by saying it overlaps, you put more on it, you leave extra space, but it really sounded like Rav Huna. Now, in today's daf, we're going to see 3 proofs for Rav Huna. The 4th one is going to be somewhat lengthy, so that's going to be the majority of this amud. Okay, so let's go right into it. Tashema shayara shechanta babik'al bikifuha bagemalin be'ukafot be'avitin b'shlifin bekanim b'kolachot mitatidin betocha. So when you have a caravan and so you're camping out, and you have with you all of your camels and we saw that live animals can be good as a wall. And you have all their saddles and cushions and wheat sheaves and boards and stalks. So you put them all out around you, and you make a wall out of it. That's all good. As long as between each camel you don't have a space that is a camel length, or ben ukaf ukaf kimlo ukaf. Ben abit labit kimlo abit. Between each saddle, you can't have a space of a saddle. Between each cushion, you cannot have a space of a cushion. So it sounds like here the breaches are equal to the walls, right? The size of a camel and then the space of a camel. And it's saying that is not good. So you see that this is a proof for Rav Huna that says when the breach equals the walls, that is not good. So let's see, how will Rav Papa answer it? Well, he can give a similar answer as we said before, previous case. Now, maybe it means not that the space of the camel is exactly a camel length, but rather enough to bring it in and out easily. So there's some wiggle room, and therefore, in fact, when it says equal space camel and breech, there's really more space than you're leaving than a camel's length, and that's why it's no good in this case. So Rav Papa can answer that, and it's a reasonable possibility. All right, so that's not conclusive. Okay, now we come to the long one. This is a long Tosefta in Masechet Kil'ayim, but very, very foundational. So in Kil'ayim, we also have an issue of mechisot, because you can't plant grapes and grain next to each other. You have to either leave space or put a wall in between. But it doesn't have to be a solid wall. It has to be a halachic mechisa, which are following all the similar definitions as we have for Eruvin. So this Tosefta is going to present three different stages, three different levels of how much space you have between them and the halachot of each. So it's a good summary of everything we've been studying. Nimset omer amita omer shalosh midot b'mechisot. Okay, there are three categories of partitions. כל שהוא פחות משלושה, צריך שלא יהיה בין זה לזה שלושה, כדי שלא יזדקר הגדי בבת ראש. If you have poles or anything, if it's less than 3, each one is less than 3 tefachim, then, so they're just thin poles, right, up to about 9 inches, you have to make sure that you have less than 3 tefachim between each one, because then we have lavud, right? So even if you just have a bunch of poles, less than 3 tefachim between each one, we consider it as if it's full. Where does that derive from, that measurement? Enough that a small animal, a goat, cannot squeeze through it easily. So like this, right? So that's the derivation. This is actually quite interesting, because we always just we have this rule: lavud means 3 tefachim or less. But this seems to be the source of it, right? Just like we saw from a mechisa cannot be above the ground 4 tefachim, because then a goat can squeeze under it. So to here, 3 tefachim, it can squeeze through it, and so therefore it's not a gate if a goat can squeeze through it. All right, so that's very important, and that's category number 1. Category number 2, kol shehu שלושה ומשלושה עד 4 צריך שלא יהיה בין זה לזה כמלואו, כדי שלא יהיה פרוס כעומד. If it's exactly 3 tefachim, so note here that the exactly 3 is included with the second stage, not with the first stage, right? Because if it's exactly 3, you can't say lavud. If it's exactly 3, or from 3 up to 4 tefachim, in such a case, so if that partition, the wall is that big, then it cannot have between it and the next one the amount of space that is equal to it. So if it's 3.5 tefachim wide, then you have to make sure that the spaces in between are less than 3.5. Why? Because the breach cannot be the same as the wall. Okay, but you already see here what we're getting at. It sounds from this language like breach and wall cannot be equal, right? From this. Ve'im haya parus merube al ha'omed af keneged ha'omed asur. But if the breach was greater than the wall, then even what is next to the wall, the vineyard, the vines that you plant, even next to the wall, are prohibited, right? So in other words, even if you're planting things, right over here, and there's a wall here, but it doesn't matter, because you have space that's greater than the wall. The whole thing is considered like nothing, and so you can't even plant anything there. Okay, from this language, if the breach is greater than the wall, then it's no good. Well, that would imply that if it's equal, then it is good, right? We're going to make all of these diukim in the language of the Mishnah. Right, so from that one, that would seem to sound like it's good, like Rav Papa. All right, but now we have the third stage, from 4 tefachim up to 10 amot. So you have also the same law as the second stage, that you can't have an equal size of space. Because you can't have equal space as wall. ואם היה פרוס כעומד, כנגד העומד מותר, כנגד הפרוס אסור. But here's the difference. If you do have more space than wall, then anything next to the adjacent to the wall is kosher to plant there, because since you have 4 tefachim, that's enough for it to be a wall in and of itself, just that piece. And so you could plant right next to the wall. It's not going to connect to the next board over because there's more space than wall, right? But it acts as its own little wall. So that's a benefit. And if there's more wall than breach, then it's all connected. It's like one solid wall, and that way you can even plant on 2 sides of the space of the breach, and the majority rules. Okay, from this language here, you see that if it ends and says if what's standing is greater than what's missing, then it's okay. That would imply that if it's equal, it's not okay, right? So you see how this Tosefta could be quite confusing, because it talks about sometimes when it's equal, sometimes this is more, sometimes that's more. And if you assume that everything is exact language, you're going to come to self-contradictions. That's what we're going to see in a second. Okay, that's the 3rd stage. Now, beyond the 3rd stage, the Tosefta also talks about, which says, Nifritza bioter me'aser asur. If you have a gap, a breach more than 10 amot, it's not permitted. Hayusham kanim, adokranim, ve'oseh lehen pe'ah milamala, afilu bioter me'aser mutad. However, if you make a surat petach, you have poles, and you put a vine, a braid, from pole to pole, then that makes a door opening, and then that would be okay even more than 10 amot. So this is really actually a 4th stage. Okay, but the main thing was the first 3 stages. All right, that's the end of the quotation of the Tosefta. Now we'll analyze it. Ketani mihat resha. Okay, when it says resha, it means the 2nd stage. Mishelosha ad arba'a ubilbad shelo yehe ben ze laze kim lo'o. So it says from 3 to 4, you have to make sure that you don't have between each one and the next, it's equal. So it cannot have equal wall and space. There, well, that's a challenge to Rav Papa, who said you can have 50-50. And this seems to say you cannot have 50-50. All right, how's Rav Papa going to answer that? Amar lecha Rav Papa, whenever it says Amar lecha, it means Rav Papa didn't actually say it. We're saying it for him, right? We only know his shita, but what might he say? We're putting words in his mouth. So he could say, "My melo'o nichnas v'yoseh," like we had before, when it says it shouldn't have the space the same as the wall. It means with wiggle room. And you always assume that it has wiggle room also, so that you have to if you had to put another board in, right? So there's a little bit of extra space than not. So when it says equal in Tosefta, it doesn't mean really equal. It means a little bit more space, and that's why it's not allowed. But if it was 50-50, then it would be okay. And Papa says, I'm not just making this up. Right after that it says, if the opening is more than the wall, then everything is prohibited. So that means hakeomed mutar. So that means if it were equal, only because the space is more. But if it was equal, it'd be okay, right? Shema mina. So there you go. It's actually a proof for it of Papa. Oh, so now we turn the tables around, and now this is a challenge, right? From that diuk, it's a challenge to Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. It's getting exciting now, isn't it? Amar lecha. Oh, he could answer also. Well, look at the 3rd stage, and I can bring a proof from that. Im haya omed merubela parus, af keneged parus mutar. Hakeparus asur. In that 3rd stage, it ends and says, if what is there is more than the gap, then even the gap is okay, which means, right, that's okay. But if it was equal, then it would be prohibited. So there you go. Rav Huna says, I have a proof from the 3rd part that make a diuk and say it's prohibited. See, the Tosefta includes all of this language. So now we're really left with a conundrum. Sefa kashya Rav Papa, Resha kashya Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. The third stage is difficult for Rav Papa. The language in the second stage is difficult for Rav Huna. So we end up having, a self-contradictory Tosefta if we really follow all of the possible inferences. All right, we're going to try to solve it for both of them. Make everybody happy. Sefa Rav Papa la kashya aidi de tanaresha parus merubeh haomed tana sefa omed merubeh al haparus. Okay, we have a principle of aide, which is that generally Mishnah and Tosefta are written in a poetic parallelism. And so in this case, since the second phrase, the second stage mentioned the case of Parutz Mirubal Haomed, from which we derived that equal is okay. So that's why in the third one, it just wanted to follow the same pattern of language. So it didn't talk about equal, but rather talked about the wall being greater than the Parutz. But in fact, even if it was equal, it would be okay. So it's just copying the language of the Resha, but the Resha is really the correct diuk, and Sefa is just Aide. It's just continuing the same structure. Sentence structure. So that's how Rav Papa could get out of that. Resha, Rav Huna, Bered Rav Yoshua, La Kashya. Well, we could say the same thing for Rav Huna the other way. I did the Balibit Nesefa, Omed Mirubela Parus, Anere Leresha, Parus Mirubela Omed. He can say that Aide works the other way. The main clause is the third one, and that's the one that says if what's standing is greater than what's open, from which we can derive that if it's equal, it's no good. That was the main thing. And since the Tosefta wanted to get to that one, it mentioned the second stage, but using the same terminology, the same structure. And that's why I said Parus Mirubel Ahmed. But really, it could have said equal also would not be good. All right, so we're still stuck, right? But now we're going to try to break through here. Okay, so now this is going back to the first stage. Let me back up a little so we can see the language. Okay, when it says here that in the first stage is if it's 3, right, up to 3 tefachim, right, then you have to make sure that the space is less than 3 tefachim. And then the second stage started with kolshu shalosha, if the walls, if those poles are exactly 3 tefachim and from 3 to 4. Now, for Rav Papa, what it's saying that it makes sense that 3 exactly should be included with 3.1 because it's the same law and same principle for both, right? The idea is that if it was exactly equal, whether it's 3 or 3.1, and you had equal wall and equal space, then it would be okay for Rav Papa. So therefore, whereas the 3, if it cannot be included in this one, because if you had exactly 3 wall and 3 space, you would not work for the law of lavud. Lavud has to be a little bit less than 3, right? So 3 works together with what's next. However, according to Rav Huna, this 3 should have been included with the first case, right? Because for him, if it's exactly equal, then it's no good. So therefore, right, 3 being exactly equal is not good. Not like the rest of the cases here. Remember, this clause was not very good for Rav Huna, right? This was the one that supported Papa better. So 3 should have been included up here for Rav Huna. That's the diuk that the Gemara is making now. So okay, so it makes sense. Rav Papa ela Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua le'arbinhu ve'litninhu kol shehu pachot mishelosha u'shlosha sarich shelo yeheh ben zeh lazeh shelosha. Whether it's less than 3 or even exactly 3, you have to make sure that between each one is less than 3, right? Because for him, if it's exactly 3 and the space is exactly 3, it's no good. So you see that you should have put the 3 up in the first one because it's the same law as the first category. Okay. All right, that's the question. And his answer is no. Mishum dela dame pesula deresha lifsula de sefa. Pesula deresha kedeh shelo yizdaker hagedi bebat ahat. No, he didn't do it. Even though he could have said it there. It's the same law, but it's a different fundamental principle behind it. The first category works with the deen of lavud, and lavud is if the goat can fit through it. And so that's the reason why anything that's that's more than 3 or more, if the space is 3 or more, is no good because it doesn't have lavud. Whereas the second here's the sefa is talking about the second stage, is because you cannot have equal space and wall. And that is the law that's applicable to exactly 3, that the problem is it can't be exactly equal space and wall. So really, I mean, technically it could be in the first category or second category. And so the Gemara was first asking, but in the first category, because that's the first place it comes up. But the answer is no, in principle, it belongs to the second category. So that is not a question to Rav Huna. Okay, so what we end up here there is no proof either way from that Tosefta. While we're on this Tosefta, just a clarification. Pachot mishelosha mani, right? Who is the author of this Tosefta that says lavud is less than 3? That's Rabbananhi. Amre pachot mishelosha amri lavud. Right? That's the general principle, majority opinion that lavud works for less than 3. Ema sefa, right? Not like Rashbag who says 4. Okay, Ema sefa, but look at the next clause. Kolshu shelosha mishlosha avad arba'a atan l'Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Right? When you say have a 3 up to 4, that 4 is an important category. 4 is only an important category according to Rashbag. So that second stage looks like it's the opinion of Rashbag. Damar pachot me'arba'a lavud. Rabbanan mishlosha v'arba'a bad arba'a shlosha v'arba'a hadu. For Rabbanan, 3 to 4 is the same thing. So you should just skip the category altogether. So that phrase sounds like Rashbag. Amar Abaye midiresha Rabbanan sefa Rabbanan. No, the whole thing has to be Rabbanan. And how are we going to reconcile it? Modu Rabbanan dechol lemishra kenegdo ika makom arba'a hashib ila la hashib. And what the rabbis do agree to Rashbag, they don't think you could do lavud, but they do agree that if it has 4, then it's considered significant partition in and of itself. And if not, it's not a significant partition in and of itself. So even Rabbanan have some category regarding something about 4. That's Abaya's answer. Rava's answer is different. Though they say no, the whole thing is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? It's all about 4. When Rashbag says you can use lavud up to 4 tefachim, that's only if it's high up, right? And you have a cross beam and it's 4 tefachim away from the wall, then you can go up to 4 amot, 4 tefachim. But if it's low down, then you have to have the practical problem that a goat can fit through it if it's more 3 or more, and so he cannot apply lavud. In other words, theoretically up to 4, but if a goat can actually fit through it, then it's impossible. He's not going to let that happen, and so therefore, according to him, the whole thing is Rashbag. All right, so that was a side point to that Tosefta, and so now going back to our outline. What we saw is that we had 2 proofs for Rav Papa. The first one was a very strong proof. The second one was just a reasonable proof for Rav Papa. Then we just brought a proof for Rav Huna, which was not conclusive. Another for Rav Huna from this Tosefta, which was not conclusive. And now we're going to go with the last one, a short proof from the case of many windows, a case that we did read before. Hashema. דפנות הללו שרובן פתחים וחלונות מותר, בלבד שיהיה עומד מרובה על הפרוץ. Okay, this is a paradox in and of itself, this braita. Right, if you have an area enclosed by walls and most of it is openings and windows, right? And we say windows that are like low down, so it's basically mostly openings. That's okay, as long as there's more wall than breach. Now, this doesn't make sense because if it's mostly openings and windows, then how could you say it's that as long as it's more windows than breach? That by definition is more of it is breached. So we explain first. Take the word ruban, it doesn't mean majority, it just means a lot. if I have a barrier and it has a lot of windows and a lot of openings, it's fine as long as it's not the majority. Okay, so now we make a diuk. It says that it can't be the majority, but if it's exactly equal, then it should be okay, right? Because if equal was bad, then it should have said equal is bad. But since it said majority is not good, so that means equal is okay. Okay, so that right, Bachi Omed, Parutz, sorry, I just whatever I just said, it's the opposite, right? This is allowed. This is mutad as long as it's not the majority. So that will mean if it's equal, then it's asur, right? If it's equal, that's asur. Tiyuta, papa, tiyufta. And this is a challenge to the papa. And when we have a double language tiyufta, that means conclusive proof, checkmate, right? The papa cannot be reconciled with this baraita and therefore must be rejected. And so that would be to seem to be the end, except now we have a surprise. And 50-50 is allowed. This is very strange because you just said knockout punch. Oh, but we do follow him. Well, how do you win the game if you just had a knockout punch? That's the next question. You just rejected him, and then you say halacha follows him. In משום דדייקה מתניתין כבטא דתנן לא יהיו פרסות יתרות על הבניין הכבניין מותר. Yes, because of the first proof, which was from our Mishnah. So what this is saying is that you're right. This baraita cannot be reconciled with a papa. Okay, but the Mishnah, Mishnah very strongly follows the papa. So there's a machloket between this Mishnah and this baraita, right? So in machloket between the baraita and Mishnah, the Mishnah is going to win out. So although this baraita supports Rav Huna, still we say halacha is like Rav Papa because of our Mishnah, and that is the conclusion.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So I think because in the Mishnah it says that the breaches can't be more than 50%, then if the wall is exactly 50%, then it still follows what the Mishnah is saying. Like if the breaches are 50% or less, that means that it's kasher. So then,
right.
Then that means that the walls don't have to be more than 50% as long as the breaches are 50% or less.
Right. You can't. The Mishnah says the breach cannot be more than the wall. Okay. So if it's 50%, then the breach is not more than the wall.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Very good. I mean, you see from that long Tosefta that the Tanaim are very exacting in their language because they do address the equal and greater and less. So it does make sense to read that in, right? The question is, did the Mishnah mean to be that exact language or not? Mishnah, the Gemara concludes that yes, it does. Okay, and now we go to the next Mishnah. Mekifin shelosha. The rest of this is going to be about making a wall with 3 ropes. Okay, this is actually quite relevant because a lot of sukkahs that you buy today, when the canvas ones, we always used to use them growing up. But it turns out the halacha that now we learned is that if the canvas sways too much, it's not a good wall, right? And so now when they sell it to you, they sell it to you with these strips, right? These canvas strips that you can pull tight around the circumference of the sukkah, and you put them in 3 levels. I'll show you a picture first, it'll be easier. Right, like this, right? Do you ever see this in people's sukkahs? Yeah? Okay, so you put one here, one here, one here, and the idea is that you use the principle of lavud. So from here to here is less than 3 tefachim, so that's all like filled in. Here to here is less than all filled in. Here from here to the bottom is less than 3 tefachim, so it's all filled in. You add it up all together, and you have a mechisa that's 10. So this could be a wall in and of itself, and you don't need the rest of the canvas walls. This is halachically a kosher wall for a sukkah, for Shabbat, for kilayim, and for everything else. Okay, so this is very, very useful. And let's see the Mishnah that's the source of it. מקיפין 3 חבלים זה למעלה מזה וזה למעלה מזה, בלבד שלא יהיו בין חבל לחבל לחברו 3 טפחים. So you can put these 3 ropes one above the other, as long as you don't have 3 tefachim or more between any 2 of them, right? Because we need to say lavud. Another stipulation is that the rope itself needs to have some width, because if you have 3, 3, and 3, that only equals 9, and you need it to be 10 high. So if the width of the rope itself is a tefach, and that's times 3, you have another 3 tefachim, and then you'll get 10 tefachim. So that's why when they sell it, it's not just a string, but rather like a strip, right? That's about an inch thick or so. Okay, so that's makifin bekanin. Now, second case. So this is when you do it horizontally instead of vertically. So you have poles sticking up. Forget the horizontal ones here, right? Let's say I had vertical poles, and between each one is less than 3 tefachim, and you go all around. So it's kind of like a picket fence. It says that would also be okay as long as it's less than 3 tefachim between each one. Okay, that's the basic principle. בשיירה דיברו דברי רבי יהודה. חכמים אומרים לא דיברו בשיירה אלא בהווה. Rabbi Yehuda says this law that you can make these, this type of flimsy wall only is a special leniency for caravans. Because they're traveling, it's very impossible for them to make a nice wall, so we permit them to make a flimsy wall just out of rope or just out of sticks like this. However, Chachamim, and the Mishnah before was talking about caravans, so that's, it fits. Chachamim, however, say, Lo dibru b'shayra lebehoveh. When they say caravan, it's giving an example. Caravan is when you're most likely to use such a fence. But truth is, you can use it anytime. Caravan is only simply an example. Okay, so Chachamim are much more lenient than the Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, another machloket, somewhat related. The first opinion says that you need to have both vertical and horizontal sticks in a fence. You can't only have sticks, and you can't only have ropes this way or that way. That's the minority opinion, was very stringent. By the way, this the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda is the son of this Rabbi Yehuda, right? So the like father, like son, they both are limiting this kind of thing. Chachamim say it's fine, either all horizontal or all vertical. That's fine as long as you have the principle of lavud and it rises up to 10 tefachim. That's the Mishnah. Okay. Amarav humnuna amarav. Hare ameru omed merubel parus b'shti have omed. Ba'erev humnuna be'erev mai. All right. He says we all discussed just now that if you have more space than if you have more wall than space, regarding if it's vertical, then it's okay, right? If it's equal, it's okay. However, what if it's horizontal? Right? We were talking about in the vertical way. What if it's horizontal? Can I, if I have something and then nothing and then something, can I also use the same principle going from down to up and have that if it's have equal space and equal wall or not? That's Rav Hamnuna's question. Okay, we're going to see that there's going to be two more interpretations of this question, but following the interpretation that we understand right now, we're going to try to answer it. Amar Abaye Tashema. Have a Mishnah to come and answer to explain it. Shiur havalim ve'obyan yater al tefach. Shiur kol asara tefachim. Our Mishnah just said that you have to make sure that the ropes themselves, when you add them all up, or at least are more than a tefach, so that it should all add up to 10. So ve'ita lamali yater al tefach. However, why do I need that? Why do I need the ropes to have a width? If I would answer yes to Rav Hamnuna's question, that I can have that as long as I have more wall than breach, right? Forget the equal. We're not even dealing with the equal part. As long as I have more wall than breach, it's okay. Well, if that principle applies this way also, right, in horizontal boards, then I shouldn't care how big the string. Even if I have a tiny string, it should be just fine. because, so what if I have a breach? I have more wall, I have 6 wall and 4 breach, that's a majority wall. Remember now, although we only have 3 strings, the principle of lavud acts as a legal fiction, and we consider everything between the lavud to be as if there's actual wall there. Okay? So I have actual wall, so 6 of actual wall, and 4, since it's 4, I can't say lavud, so it's a breach. But so what? I have more wall than breach. So what do I need? Why do Mishnah need to tell me that the string has to be thick? Since the Mishnah tells me the string has to be thick, that implies that I cannot use the principle of majority rules when I go horizontal with horizontal strings. Okay, so that's the proof. Now, just analyzing this question, the question is where are you going to put this breach, right? As you said, להעביד פחות משלושה בחבל משהו, right? So okay. להעביד פחות משלושה בחבל משהו, פחות משלושה בחבל משהו, פחות מארבעה בחבל משהו. That's all part of the question now. I just said you have 3 and you have 3 less a little bit, 3 less a little bit, and 4, and the strings are a little bit, and so right, it should be fine without any width of string. Okay. So that's the challenge. That would be a possible answer to Rav Hamnuna's question. Now, figuring out how this works. Where do you put the breach of 4? If you put it on the bottom, obviously that's no good because then the goats can go under it, right? So everyone agrees that you can't have big space on the bottom. Even if you had a solid wall from here up to 20 feet, right? This way it wouldn't be good because the breach is on the bottom and they can go through. So it can't go on the bottom. If you put the breach on top, that's also no good because then you have a space on top, right? It's all space. And this, although we apply lavud, the question, like we had a few tapim ago, is like, which one are you going to apply first? If you go down from top down, kind of analyze it from this order of operations, right? So you have whole, and then you have a string, another whole that's bigger than 4, which is nothing, and now you have a whole, and before you do lavud, it's just all wholes, so you don't have a majority yet. So you're right, if you think of it this way, here, lavud, this one's lavud, okay, so that's filled in, and then the big breach, but because you don't have anything on the other side of the breach, this breach doesn't count as majority. Maybe it's just part of the space that's above it, not part of the wall that's below it. So you need something on both sides. All right, so how about in the middle? If you put it in the middle, then that would only work if I assume the principle, but it's a contested principle, that I can combine 2 different portions on each side of the breach together to make a majority, right? But that was a subject to machloket, and then machloket was not resolved. And if this was so clear, then it should have been resolved from here, because I have 3, and then a breach, and then 3, so I add the 6 together. But since we don't resolve that machloket, so we don't want to just assume that this is only according to one opinion, so you couldn't put it in the middle either. So you see that, in fact, we cannot answer Rav Hamnuna's question based on this, because there's no place to put the breach. Okay, so instead of answering the question, we're going to reinterpret his question. So he must have been asking something slightly different. Perhaps he brought a mat that is full, a full mat, right? And it's 7 and a bit, right? So you have a space of less than 3 on the bottom, so that's okay with lavud. And you have this. הושבק בה 4 ומשהו, והוקימנה ועוקבה בפחות מ3. So it's similar to the case above, except instead of having a space here, you have a mat here. So you have 3, and then a full space of 4. And so here, that would be the question. In such a case, can you say, even though the majority is space and only minority is wall, can we apply lavud even though this majority is space? That could be the question. Or another version of the question is Rabbi She'amar mechisa teluya iba yale kidva mine Rabbi Tabla merav mechisa teluya ma'u shetatir bechurba male ed mechisa teluya moteret ela b'mayim kal shehu shekelu chachamim b'mayim. And so this was another statement that we had also before, that when we have a ruin, and so in other words a broken wall, and the wall is broken in such a way that it's hanging, so there's wall above but there's space below, right? So what is the law in that case? And we answered that it's only allowed over water, right? Remember that water, that I could put something outside the ship and lower a pail down, and it's as if the walls extend all the way down, but that only applies to water and not to anything else. And so that's what Rav Hamnuna was talking about according to Rav Asher's opinion. Okay. Okay, so a little bit more to go. And okay, makifin bekanin. The Mishnah says that you can put boards all the way around, like a picket fence. Bashayara in beyachid la. Okay, and so Rabbi Yehuda said that this leniency only works for a caravan. Okay, so that means for a caravan it works, but if an individual wants to use such a fence, a flimsy fence, then it's not good. Is that true that Rabbi Yehuda thinks that an individual cannot use it? We have a contradiction. V'atanya Rabbi Yehuda omer kol mechisot Shabbat lo yitiru leyachid yoter mibet sa'tayim. He says that regarding all mechisot of Shabbat, it's not okay for an individual to use it more than 2 bet se'ah, right? 5,000 square amot. So, okay, fine. You can't use a flimsy wall more than 2 satayim, but that means you can use it, right? You just can't use it as big as you want, but you can use it, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So how come the Mishnah says only a caravan can use a flimsy wall? Here he said an individual can also use a flimsy wall, just limited. So that seems to be a contradiction. Okay, our answer is going to quote from an answer that someone gives to another case that we're about to see. So when the Yehuda says in the Mishnah that it can only be used for a caravan, he means it can be used for a caravan as big as you want. So it's a very big caravan, and they need more than 2 se'ah of space. They can make a flimsy wall, right, just out of strings or poles, as big as they want. But an individual still can use such a thing only in limited space of only bet sa'atayim. So that's the principle of Rav Nachman said as an answer to a different case. And we're going to apply that here. What is the other case where Rav Nachman actually said that answer? Well, it has to do with the very end of our Mishnah. Rav Nachman v'temara bevai bar Abaye ahad itnan kol mechisa shena shel sheti va'arib ena mechisa divrei Rabbi Yosef be'Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so according to Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda we just discussed, he says that every fence has to have both horizontal and vertical poles. Chachamim said one or the other. So now we ask a contradiction. Did he really say you need both? He said both an individual and a caravan can use flimsy walls. Flimsy walls means only one or the other. And so what's the difference between a single person and a caravan? If it's 1 or 2 people, they can only use it for a space of 5,000 square amot. It's limited in its use. However, it's 3 or more people, then they get to have bigger space. Instead of 2 se'ahs, they can have an area of 6 se'ah. Okay, so in other words, everyone can use it in some way or another, but if you want to make it infinitely big, more than 6 se'ah, then you need both vertical and horizontal. But it's good for something. Okay, that baraita continues and says, Chachamim omrim echad yachid v'echad she'era notinen kol sorkan, but shelo yeheh bet sa'atayim panui. Chachamim say whether it's an an individual or a caravan, they can make it as big as they want, as long as they use the space. The empty space can't be more than a bet se'ah. So in other words, if they have a lot of people and it takes them, their camp is 10 miles wide, that's fine, but it has to be all filled in. They have to have tents and stuff all over the place and can't have just empty space, because empty space just looks like nothing. Empty space and a flimsy wall, right, that really looks like nothing. So the bet time is still important for them, but only as the extra, more than what they need. That's Chachamim.
Rabbi,
Okay.
based on this, couldn't
Yes.
I know they use Mahane Israel in the desert to describe Reshut Rabim, but based on this, they could have turned the whole thing into one. They could have just put a rope around the whole camp.
Mm-hmm. A rope, yeah. They put a rope around the whole camp, and because everything's being used. I hope so, as long as not empty space in between. I don't know, maybe there is.
Yeah, even with
Right, but better to have a wall. I mean, yeah. Right, they could have, yeah, okay, they could have put that's still, even that's a big rope that you would need. Okay. Amar Nachman. So now we have a contradiction. We had a contradiction. Right? Did he say? On one hand, the Mishnah says you can't do it at all, and here he says you can use it just up to 1 se'ah for 1 or 2 se'ah for 1 or 2 people, 6 se'ah for 3 people. So which one is it? Amar Nachman. Oh, the Mishnah is only talking about if you want to give them as much space as you want. If you want infinite space, then you have to have vertical and horizontal. If not, then you can use it up to these limits that he said. Okay, now we're going to end with the halacha l'maaseh of this case. Arash Rab Nachman mishum Rabbeinu Shemuel Yachid notin lo bet satayim shenayim שנותנים לו בית סעתיים, שלושה נעשו שייריו נותנים להן בית סעתיים. Rab Nachman got up as a derasha. It's like he gave a public lecture about it, which is like official halacha. And he said 1 or 2 people can make a flimsy wall and use it for 2 se'ahs of space. 3 people is like a caravan, and they can use up to 6. In other words, he's saying halacha is like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, which is very strange. Shabbat Zabanan, Rabbi Yehuda. So they asked him, why'd you leave the majority opinion and follow the minority opinion? So he realized he made a mistake. So Hadar Okim Rab Nachman Amora Ale Vedarash. So he went and got a speaker. Amora is like officially means translator, but it means actually a public a person with a very loud voice, and that means it's an official lecture. So he would he would say the halacha, and then the Amora would pronounce it. And so he said in the subsequent lecture, what I said last time was a mistake. יחיד נותנים לו בית סעתיים, שניים נותנים לו בית סעתיים, שלושה נעשו שייריו נותנים להן כל סורקן. So he fixed the third one, that if it's 3 a caravan, then you can have as much as you want. That is Chachamim. But the first 2, he left it according to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. So he only fixed one of them. So we wonder, Rabbi Yosef, why did you follow the first 2 still like Rabbi Yosef, and only the third one you followed a banan? He did that purposefully. Okay, sorry about that. Ran out of battery. Okay, he did that because Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, his father, agreed with him regarding those cases, the first cases of 1 or 2 individuals. And so therefore, since it's those 2 sages agree, so he followed their more limited opinion. Whereas for the third one, when it's 3 or more people, that is like a caravan, and so therefore he followed the majority view for that. So his correction wasn't fully like Rabbanan, but he did. It was a correction that was purposeful, in part like Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, and in part like Chachamim. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen. Amen.